Hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of Charts with Dan. We are back again on a Monday because I'm on the road again today to check out Disclosure Day. I'll have my review for that out tomorrow morning. So we're going to be using the dreaded estimates, but as with last week, there's really not a whole lot of doubt as to what the box office results were. So let's jump right into the top 10 from this past weekend. At number one was Scary Movie, which debuted with an estimated $55 million. Unadjusted for inflation, that is the best debut in franchise history, and we're going to dig down into those numbers a lot more in just a few minutes. In second place was Masters of the Universe with $29.3 million. Not a summer breakout hit, and a big investment for Amazon. Reportedly, they put $175 to $200 million into the film, and we are also going to jump into those numbers a lot more. Backrooms is definitely a summer horror hit, but in a different way than Obsession, because it saw a big decrease in business in weekend number 2, whereas Obsession saw an increase. It dropped 68.1%, so it's going to be more front-loaded, but still brought in $25.9 million. Its domestic total is at $135 million, and keep in mind it had a very, very, very low budget, so it's doing just fine. Speaking of Obsession, it was not able to add business for the fourth weekend of wide release, but it barely lost any. It dropped just 6.6%, so the phenomenal box office run continues. If the estimates are just a little bit off on Backrooms, it could even jump into that number 3 spot. It's at over $150 million domestically, and this was the first weekend that the top 4 were all over $20 million since last April, when Sinners, Revenge of the Sith, The Accountant 2, and a Minecraft movie were on top. This is also just the 5th time it's happened at the box office post-COVID, so the recovery continues at the summer box office. In 5th place was The Amazing Digital Circus, The Last Act, which brought in $12.39 million for the weekend. It's brought in about $20.7 million since it opened on Thursday. So another sleeper hit, low-budget hit that is injecting a lot of business into the box office. At number 6 is The Mandalorian and Grogu, which dropped out of the top 5, and after a not-so-great second weekend, it also didn't have a great third weekend. It dropped 59.1% to bring in $10 million. It's at $155.8 million domestically. Michael dropped 35.1% in its 7th weekend to bring in $7.7 million. It's over the $350 million domestic mark. Nate Bargatze's comedy, The Breadwinner, dropped 53.8% to bring in $3.4 million. So not a sign of great legs with that movie. It's at $13.8 million domestically. Pressure dropped 48.4% to bring in $3 million for an $11.1 million domestic total. And The Devil Wears Prada 2 spends potentially its last weekend in the top 10 before it's bumped out by another Emily Blunt film. It made $2.8 million. Its domestic total now at $214.9 million. Dropping out of the top 10 this past weekend, we had Mortal Kombat 2, which is out after 4 weeks. The Sheep Detectives, which is also out after 4 weeks. I had so many people recommend that I see it that I actually did go see it this past weekend. My theater was about, close to half full, and I thought it was a delightful little film. Passenger is also out after 2 weeks in the top 10, not able to capitalize on the horror strength that we've been seeing from other films at the box office. And when we look at the movies that lost the most theaters, Passenger leads the pack. It lost 1,909 theaters. It's now in just 625. Power Ballad, the latest film from John Carney, added 1,265 theaters. It's now in 1,275. I also saw this movie yesterday. I did a little bit of a double feature, and I really, really liked it. I like John Carney's films, and I didn't like this one maybe as much as Sing Street, but I thought it was good. Mortal Kombat 2 lost 1,125 theaters. It's now in just 478. The Sheep Detectives lost over 1,000 theaters. It's in 1,757. And Boots Riley's I Love Boosters has not had a lot of runway at the box office. It lost another 1,000 theaters. It's now in just 300 theaters. This is what the 2026 box office looks like versus the 2025 box office. This year is in green, and for the second consecutive weekend, we saw a big gain over where we were this time last year. We were up 60% over the same weekend in 2025. Our year-to-date box office is at $3.9 billion. We've got Disclosure Day coming up this weekend. We've got Toy Story 5 very soon on the release schedule. And what looked like a very promising June is actually becoming a very promising June because the first weekend up substantially over where we were last year. So let's dive deep into some of the films in the top 10, and we will start with the number one movie in the land, which is Scary Movie. It posted the 8th best opening for a film this year, right behind, wouldn't you know it, Scream 7, the movie that launched the parody series that did so well this past weekend. So Scream 7 debuting with $63.6 million. Scary Movie with an estimated $55 million. That puts it ahead of Hoppers and Mortal Kombat 2. When we look at the franchise tracker for Scary Movie, its $55 million debut, unadjusted for inflation, is the best in franchise history. It comes at about $7 million ahead of 2003's Scary Movie 3, which was the first film in the franchise to not involve the Wayans brothers. This is their return to the franchise. 2000's Scary Movie had the third best debut in series history, followed by Scary Movie 4. Scary Movie 2, although it should be noted that that film opened on Wednesday instead of Friday, and then Scary Movie 5. When you adjust for inflation, this year's Scary Movie has the fourth best debut in franchise history at $55 million. That's substantially behind Scary Movie 4, which debuted to an adjusted $69.2 million, 2000's Scary Movie at $90.4 million, and Scary Movie 3 just ahead of it at $91.3 million. But the 2026 version still able to come in ahead of Scary Movie 2 and Scary Movie 5. Looking at overall domestic gross, which we often don't do on opening weekend, but Scary Movie 2026 is already the fifth highest grossing film in the franchise, ahead of Scary Movie 5, which essentially put it on ice for several years. And unadjusted for inflation, I think it's got a pretty good line on Scary Movie 2, possibly Scary Movie 4, but then we'll have to see how the legs kick in to see where it lands when you get into the Scary Movie 3 and then the original Scary Movie category. 2000 Scary Movie, still easily the highest grossing film in the franchise at $157 million. Adjusted for inflation, the original Scary Movie comes in at $335 million. So by far and away, the most popular film in the franchise. Scary Movie 3 is at $208.7 million. Scary Movie 2 is at $162 million. Scary Movie 4 is at $156 million. And this year's Scary Movie still in fifth place, but at $55 million. And adjusted for inflation, I think it's going to have a hard time breaking out of that number 5 spot, especially because audience reaction wasn't terrible, but it wasn't great either. When you adjust for inflation, though, it is still ahead of Scary Movie 5. And that brings us to our Charts with Dan trivia question for this week. The last installment in the Scary Movie series, Scary Movie 5, opened in a distant second place to what sports biopic? So we're talking about, I think, 2013, right around that range. What sports biopic opened way ahead of Scary Movie 5? I'll give you a hint. It involves an actor who would go on to become a part of a major franchise. Give me another second to think. Pause if you don't want to know the answer, because here it comes. It was 42, starring the late, great Chadwick Boseman as Jackie Robinson. It was easily number 1 back in April 2013, with Scary Movie 5 at number 2. These are the best openings for parody films, and I gave a lot of thought as to what qualifies as a parody film and what doesn't qualify as a parody film. These are the ones that made the cut for me. And unadjusted for inflation, 2026's Scary Movie has the second best opening of all time for a parody movie, behind Austin Powers in Goldmember at $73 million. Austin Powers was a bit of a borderline case for me, but the title is a parody. It's a parody of James Bond, so I decided to include the series as part of these parody movies. The Spy Who Shagged Me has the third best opening for a parody film at $54.9 million, followed by Scary Movie 3, Scary Movie 2000, and Scary Movie 4. Then we have The Naked Gun 2.5, The Smell of Fear, the oldest movie by far on this list at $20.8 million, followed by Scary Movie 2, and then the unfortunate byproducts of the Scary Movie series, Date Movie and Epic Movie. And when you adjust for inflation, it's actually these same 10 movies, just in a different order, with Austin Powers in Goldmember still at number 1 at $145.8 million. followed by the opening of The Spy Who Shagged Me at $124.8 million. Then we have Scary Movie 3, the original Scary Movie, and Scary Movie 4. 2026's Scary Movie puts up the 6th best opening for a parody film of all time, just ahead of The Naked Gun 2.5, which opened to $50.8 million adjusted for inflation. A big jump from the first movie to the second movie. Then we have Scary Movie 2, Date Movie, and Epic Movie. So let's talk a little bit about Masters of the Universe. And as I mentioned, Amazon MGM put about $175-200 million into the movie. I don't think that a second place opening around $30 million was what they had in mind. But it's interesting to see the spin that's been put on this, because there have been a lot of statements from people involved with Amazon and Amazon MGM that are kind of trying to make the same case for Masters of the Universe that we heard about The Mandalorian and Grogu. One of them being that theatrical is just one part of the strategy for this film, and that it's really to drive awareness so that people will see it on streaming, which will help it become profitable later on. And I'm sure that is part of the calculation. This show is about box office profitability, so that's what we're going to focus on. But even given that strategy, I find it very hard to believe that they are happy with this opening, that this was the intended size of the opening. But listen, you got to spin it. They're not going to sit down. They're not going to admit defeat. The other thing I noticed is that they stressed heavily that Masters of the Universe played really well with young audiences, and that was a reason to not judge it based on its opening weekend, because the word of mouth among kids may be great. That would drive business later on. And it is true that young audiences responded very strongly to the film. Its top scores were kids under 12. But what the Amazon folks are not mentioning is that kids under 12, according to demographics taken at theaters around the country, were only about 4 to 5% of the audience for Masters of the Universe this past weekend. It may have been aimed at a family audience, but much like The Mandalorian and Grogu, the vast majority of moviegoers were not kids. According to the demographics that I saw, 57% of the audience was over 35, 36% of the audience was over 45. So they were attracting a lot more kids at heart, people like me, than a whole generation of new fans. And I'm as skeptical about the prospects of this movie doing well with family audiences and having good legs as I was about The Mandalorian and Grogu, because once again, the demographics just don't show me that this is building a family fan base. It is a movie that was intended to be a 4-quadrant film, but is really only delivering to the older fans who already knew the franchise. We'll see. Maybe this will have better legs than The Mandalorian and Grogu. The audience response, if you look at cinema score, etc., was about the same. I think it got a B minus cinema score, which is not fantastic. But, you don't know until all the box office dollars have been counted. But there are some striking similarities between Masters of the Universe and The Mandalorian and Grogu, not least of which is the fact that these are both aging franchises that obviously were hoping to bring in younger viewers, but are still appealing to a lot of the older viewers. I wanted to throw a chart together for Masters of the Universe, and I have to tell you that I probably agonized over this chart more than any other chart that I've ever put together for the show. So this is a chart of the top 10 openings for live action movie franchises based on TV cartoons. And you can see all those disclaimers because there are so many shows that were cartoons but based on comics, or were cartoons but based on theatrical short films. Do you include reboots? Do you not include reboots? So if you have any issues with this chart, I can promise you any argument you have with me is an argument that I have already had with myself. I spent an obscene amount of time trying to figure out what should be on this chart and what should not. But ultimately, I decided that first live action franchise films, so the first film in a series or a reboot that happens after an extended layoff, is eligible for this chart. These characters can be based on action figures or comics or whatever else if they debuted in animation on television. And films that are majority live action animation hybrid are eligible. So, for example, The Smurfs is eligible, but the first SpongeBob movie is not, because The Smurfs is a majority live action animation hybrid, and the first SpongeBob movie isn't. Like I said, this was a ridiculous amount of trying to figure this out. So at number 1 is 2007's Transformers at $70.5 million. Then 2014's Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles at $65.5 million. Again, this was a reboot of the series, much like Masters of the Universe was a new take on the franchise. We'd already seen it in theaters already back in 1987. Then we have G.I. Joe, The Rise of Cobra. This was the first live-action G.I. Joe project that we'd seen at $54.7 million. I was shocked that it opened that high. Then we have Scooby-Doo at $54.1 million. Again, the first live-action that we'd seen of the animated show. Alvin and the Chipmunks is at number 5 at $44.3 million, followed by The Last Airbender at $40.3 million, The Smurfs at $35.6 million, The Flintstones at $29.6 million, and then Masters of the Universe pretty much neck and neck with The Flintstones, except The Flintstones opened about 30 years ago. So there's about 30 years of inflation not included in this chart. And then at number 10, I have 1990s Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles at $25.3 million. Now, if you want to count the Looney Tunes as having originated on television because they were theatrical and then they weren't, and what this was, the number 10 spot was the one I agonized the most about it. I deemed that the Looney Tunes were not eligible because they debuted in feature theatrical animated shorts. But if you want to deem them eligible for cartoons because Looney Tunes was such a popular TV franchise, then just put Space Jam there at number 10 instead of 1990s Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Like I said, an obscene amount of time trying to figure out what to put on that chart and what not to. I guess it would have been easy not to do it, but this isn't No Charts with Dan. This is Charts with Dan. So when in doubt, I'm going to make a chart. Backrooms may have had a steep drop in weekend number 2, but it is already, and by a pretty large margin, the highest grossing A24 release of all time domestically after just 2 weekends at $135 million. It easily leapfrogged Marty Supreme, which I thought was headed toward being the first A24 film to break $100 million domestically. It fell just short, and then Backrooms raced there in just about 8 or 9 days. So an impressive performance from Backrooms, even when you don't consider the budget, and even more impressive performance when you do consider the very low budget of the film. Also, on last week's show, I included this chart, the movies that have been at number 1 domestically with the youngest directors. And I think as I was trying to fact check everything, etc., I'd forgotten that Obsession did hit number 1 on a few select weekdays, even though it was not a number 1 movie overall for any weekend. So I decided to add Curry Barker to this chart, the third youngest director to have a number 1 movie at age 26. He comes in behind John Singleton with Poetic Justice at age 25, and then, of course, Kane Parsons at 20 years old. And let's talk a little bit about Obsession. It continues its phenomenal run at the box office. And there was one particular record that I saw referenced in a lot of different box office reports and the trades, etc., saying that Obsession had set the record for the best 4th weekend performance for a horror movie, beating The Blair Witch Project. And to me, I think that is partially true. Yes, Obsession did set that record, but I don't think that comparing it to The Blair Witch Project is necessarily a fair comparison, because the 4th weekend of The Blair Witch Project was actually only its 2nd weekend of wide release. It was also the weekend where it expanded into over 2,000 theaters. So it's not really an apples to apples comparison. In my mind, Obsession did not take the record away from The Blair Witch Project. It took the record away from Sinners. And these are the best 4th weekends for a horror movie in wide release. So this is when all of these movies had been in wide release for 4 weekends. Obsession does take the record, the best performance we've ever seen, if you don't adjust for inflation, for a horror film in its 4th weekend in wide release at $25.6 million. That is ahead of Sinners last year, which made $22.1 million in its 4th weekend of wide release. Then we have The Sixth Sense at just over $20 million, so a pretty elite $20+ million club in the horror genre, followed by It at $16.9 million, I Am Legend at $15.7 million, The Ring at $15.5 million, Signs at $14.2 million, Get Out at $13.4 million, A Quiet Place at $11 million, and Weapons at $10.4 million. As I was going through and doing the research for this, horror is such a front-loaded genre that for 95% of horror films, by the time you get to weekend number 4, they are easily into the single digits. So very rare for a horror film to even be in the double digits in weekend number 4. And Obsession, once again, rewriting the record book as far as performances in the genre, and really performances in general. This is one of the most special, notable, and I think memorable box office runs that I've seen, not just for a horror movie or a summer movie, but for any movie in the 10 years that I've been tracking box office week to week, and I can't wait to see where it goes next. The Mandalorian and Grogu did not get any of that box office magic, and this is what the Star Wars franchise tracker looks like when you look at overall domestic gross. We're several weekends in now, so I think this is when you can start looking at these numbers. And right now, The Mandalorian and Grogu is 12th out of 13 theatrical Star Wars films at $155.8 million. It is the lowest grossing live-action Star Wars film, even before you do any sort of inflation adjustment. And again, I've seen all the arguments made for The Mandalorian and Grogu that I saw made for Masters of the Universe. It may very well be that Disney has designs on The Mandalorian and Grogu as far as streaming and merchandising and all of that stuff, but that's not box office, and that's what this show is about. And even given all that, again, like I said with Masters of the Universe, I can't imagine that this is the box office performance that Disney had in mind, even with different expectations over it being spun off of a TV show or over the different downstream revenues that it could generate. And that leads us to the return of an old friend here on Charts with Dan. I stopped doing these last year, but really after I saw the kind of story making that Disney was doing with The Mandalorian and Grogu and sort of spinning things out, I figured, well, in the face of that, maybe an imperfect system isn't such a bad system after all. So let's look at a profitability breakdown for The Mandalorian and Grogu. Again, I want to stress, these are estimates. It is hard to find solid, concrete data on budget, on how much a movie spends on marketing. So these are all estimates based on reporting and based off of my research and what I know about how the box office operates. So let's look at just how profitable The Mandalorian and Grogu may or may not be. Of course, the movie made next to nothing in China, and you only get about 20% back from China anyway. So that's about $1.87 million. Movies bring back about 40% of what you get internationally. So it's made about $128 million internationally, excluding China. That's about $51.3 million back to the studio. And then we have the week-by-week breakdowns as far as what it made in week one. I mean, look what it made in week one, $112.3 million. Week two, $33 million. That is a massive drop off. And then $10 million basically from this past weekend. You take 50% off of that goes to theaters. That's $5 million. The budget reported for Mandalorian and Grogu is $165 million. I get it. A lot of people don't believe that, but that's the number that I have to work with. So that's what I'm doing here. I'm giving it an advertising budget of $100 million. That seems about standard for a film like this. So I'm estimating costs for Mandalorian and Grogu at $265 million. It's made $293.6 million gross worldwide. I'm estimating a net profit of $144 million. When you put that up against the costs of the film, I'm estimating so far a theatrical loss of $120.9 million, and it has not made back even its production budget yet before you even throw in marketing and all of that stuff. So again, when you look at Disney, do they have plans for Grogu and The Mandalorian and streaming plans and bringing in money that way? Sure, I'm sure that they do. As you can see at the bottom of this graphic, profit estimates do not include ancillaries or income other than global box office receipts. But was Disney's plan to dig this movie out of a $100+ million hole? I've often said on this show, it's great for a movie to break even theatrically because then all of the other ancillary revenue is pure profit. But right now, you're going to be dumping a lot of that ancillary revenue in there just to make up that shortfall. And I just don't see anybody drawing that up. And since we're looking at profitability, let's talk about the profitability story of the summer. Let's look at Obsession. Now, there's been a lot written about the fact that the movie was made on a very small budget. And I could look at profitability just based on that budget. But the thing to keep in mind with Obsession is that it was acquired out of Toronto by Focus Features for $15 million. That is what the studio invested in the film. The budget was put up by the producers and the investors of the film originally. They've been paid back when it was acquired at Toronto. What the studio actually put in, what Focus actually put into the movie is the $15 million purchase price. So that's what I'm judging profitability by. Of course, if you were just to look at its sub $1 million budget, profitability would be much, much higher. And this is not me trying to downplay how profitable this movie is. This is just looking at the realities of the particular financing around the film. So the purchase price for the film was $15 million. The marketing spend was low, but I'm going to say they maybe put $10 million in. There were billboards, there was advertising. So I'm putting the cost for focus features for Obsession at $25 million, which is still very, very low. But look at what it's brought in, $224.7 million worldwide. I'm estimating a net return on that of $108.1 million versus estimated costs of $25 million. I've got the movie already showing a theatrical profit right now today of $83.1 million. That is paying back all of the purchase price, that is paying back all of the marketing and everything like that. So this movie should easily be profitable to the tune of $100+ million in theatrical box office receipts alone. That's not including any money you're going to make from streaming or from physical media or from any other ancillary revenue stream, from selling it down to your pay 2, pay 3 window. That is purely ticket sales. It is an absolute Cinderella story for this movie. It is going to be great for Curry Barker and everyone involved with the film as far as exposure. Indy Navarrete, of course, I think is about to be seen in a lot more stuff. And also, it's great for the studio. So it's a win-win-win all around, and a win for audiences who are obviously loving this movie. Let's turn now from the domestic box office to the markets outside of the US and Canada and look at the top 5 films internationally this past weekend. At number 1 was Scary Movie. By the way, this was also a very efficiently budgeted film, reportedly around $35-40 million. So it's already looking at profitability. It brought in $50.5 million from international markets. Masters of the Universe did not do great around the world. It brought in $25 million, and it opened day and date in a lot of markets, around 80 markets around the world. So again, another similarity with Mandalorian and Grogu. I don't think international box office is going to come to this movie's rescue. Backrooms had a less steep drop of 33.9% internationally, bringing in $24.1 million. Obsession saw another increase week over week internationally, a 28.1% increase with a $17.7 million weekend. Dear You, which is China's smash hit of the summer, dropped 42.1%, but still stayed in the top 5 internationally at $16.1 million. When you take those international numbers, you combine them with our domestic numbers, we get the top 10 films worldwide. And leading the way was Scary Movie with a $105.5 million worldwide debut. That's one of the best of the year, which we're going to look at in a minute. Masters of the Universe debuted with $54.3 million worldwide. That's not horrific, but again, keep in mind that this was a $200 million plus marketing production, so it still has a lot of work to do. Backrooms overall dropped 57.5% worldwide, really driven by its steep domestic drop, but still brought in another $50 million globally for a $212 million worldwide total. Obsession bringing in another $43.3 million globally for a total of $224.7 million. The Amazing Digital Circus, The Last Act, brought in a total of $26.4 million over this past weekend and a $35.4 million global gross, which again, you talk independent animation, low budget animation. This is basically a great performance for those artists and a great situation for movie theater owners who are getting people in the doors. Star Wars The Mandalorian and Grogu falls to number 6 globally with a 50.8% drop and a $26 million weekend. As we mentioned, it is now just shy of $300 million globally. Michael dropped 27.4% for a $23.1 million weekend. It's at $888 million. Petty, a film from India, brought in $16.3 million over the weekend. It's made $30 million globally since opening earlier in the week. It is a Telugu language sports film, and there's actually some controversy surrounding the film over shots of lead actress Janvi Kapoor. The film is apparently going to be re-edited and put back into cinemas, so we'll see if that in any way hurts the gross of the film. Dear You has the 9th highest gross of the weekend at $16.1 million. It's at $236 million globally. And The Devil Wears Prada 2 is at number 10. It dropped 38.5%, brought in another $11.8 million, and is at $663.5 million. Another very profitable film, I think, for probably everybody involved, including the stars in front of the camera. So really just so far a summer of box office successes. We've got some outliers here, but a lot of movies doing very well. Scary Movie had the 8th best opening globally of the year at $105.5 million, actually ahead of Scream 7, which opened to $96.7 million, so the parity with a bigger worldwide opening than the original franchise. How about that? And much like we saw domestically, Backrooms is now also the highest grossing A24 release of all time worldwide at $212.6 million. Chiwetel Ejiofor isn't looking at anything except for high grosses. He's actually looking at his movie there, being the number one grossing film in the history of A24. Marty Supreme bumped down to number 2 with Everything Everywhere All at Once, Civil War, and The Drama, another 2026 release, rounding out the top 5. This is what the 2026 domestic summer box office looks like so far. Number 1 is still The Devil Wears Prada 2 at $212.1 million, but Obsession, now the second highest grossing movie of the summer in June. That is nutso at $152.1 million. It's ahead of Star Wars, The Mandalorian and Grogu, which drops down to number 3 at $145.8 million. Backrooms currently at number 4, although it also has its eyes on The Mandalorian and Grogu. Mortal Kombat 2 is at number 5, but it's going to start dropping pretty soon. The Sheep Detective's currently number 6. Scary Movie debuts at number 7 on the chart, with Masters of the Universe at number 8. Passenger down 1 spot to number 9, and Hokum is down 3 spots to number 10. Dropping off of the summer top 10, we have Billie Eilish, Hit Me Hard and Soft, and The Breadwinner. And just a reminder of my personal predictions, I had Scary Movie as the 9th highest grossing film of the summer. It debuts on the list at number 7. I had Devil Wears Prada 2 at number 6 and The Mandalorian and Grogu at number 7. Disclosure Day, which opens this upcoming weekend, I had as the 10th highest grossing film of the summer, but depending on how it does, I think this is one of the ones that's absolutely in the danger zone, because we have Backrooms at number 4, Obsession at number 2. It's going to be hard to knock both of those movies out of the top 10, and I don't know if Disclosure Day is going to make it over either one of them. So this is where we really start to see how my predictions are going to hold up. Once we get to the end of June, we're going to have a much better idea. And Disclosure Day, as I mentioned, is the big summer release this weekend, and I've taken our members out of the timeout from last week. Most of you took that with a lot of great humor. So I'm going to have a member poll question out in the field this week, and I had so much fun looking at the results when I asked what your favorite Tom Cruise movie was, because he's made so many great movies, that I decided to ask you what your favorite Steven Spielberg movie is. That is the member poll question this week. In honor of Disclosure Day hitting theaters this weekend, what's your favorite Steven Spielberg movie? You can answer right now in the member poll. If your favorite is already left there as a comment, please upvote that favorite instead of leaving the answer a second time. It makes the results a lot easier to tabulate, and I will reveal the results. I'm anxious to see what everybody says. Don't just say Jaws because you're trying to curry favor with me. Actually answer your favorite film. The results will be revealed on next week's Charts with Dan. Let's return now to the domestic box office and look at what I call some of our specialty charts, and we'll start with the top per theater averages this past weekend. At number 1, as far as movies that have reported here on Sunday night, we have Scary Movie at $15,759 per theater in each of its almost 3,500 theaters. In second place is Jinsei, a Japanese animated film that covers the entire lifespan of a music star. Reviews on this film have been very strong so far. Obsession comes in third place with about $8,800 per theater. I think it added theaters once again this past weekend, still in number 3. Masters of the Universe coming in fourth at $7,970 per theater in each of its 3,677 theaters, so it ranks ahead of Obsession as far as overall box office, but on a theater-per-theater basis, Obsession was ahead of He-Man. Backrooms rounding out the top 5 at $7,277 per theater in each of its 3,565 theaters. These were the top films in limited release, which I define as fewer than 1,000 theaters. At number 1 was Petty from India in 755 theaters, which brought in just over $1 million. Tuner, which expanded to over 500 theaters, brought in $650,000. The 30th anniversary of Trainspotting, 30 years, believe it or not, in 374 theaters, brought in $270,000. And then based on the movies that I have information for, we have a big drop to number 4 4 with Steal This Story, Please, a documentary that's been in theaters for several weeks, bringing in $20,000 in 22 theaters, and Time and Water in its second week and in 7 theaters, bringing in $10,764. This is what the 2026 domestic box office looks like so far this year. The Super Mario Galaxy movie is at number 1 at $427.9 million. I think that Toy Story 5 is going to be its first major challenger this summer. Then we have Project Hail Mary at number 2. Michael trying to snake up there into that number 2 spot. It's only about $12 million behind Project Hail Mary. The Devil Wears Prada 2 at number 4 and Hoppers at number 5. Obsession jumps up 2 spots in the overall 2026 box office to number 6. The Mandalorian and Grogu drops down to number 7. Backrooms enters the chart at number 8. Scream 7 is down 2 spots to number 9. GOAT is down 1 spot to number 10. And Wuthering Heights is off the annual box office top 10. And this is what the 2026 worldwide box office looks like. And would you look at that? We have our first billion-dollar movie of the year. The Super Mario Galaxy movie was able to crawl over the finish line and break that billion-dollar barrier. I believe it is the 61st movie to break $1 billion worldwide. And let's see if we can have 2 with Michael. It's at $888 million. I think it still has the Japanese market to go. I wouldn't necessarily bet money that it's going to break $1 billion, but it's going to be pretty close. And it wouldn't shock me if it did, because this has been an immensely successful film with audiences around the world. Project Hail Mary's in 3rd place at $679 million. The Devil Wears Prada 2 kind of sneaking up on it at $663.5 million. Then we have Pegasus 3 in 5th place, Hoppers in 6th, The Mandalorian and Grogu in 7th place, Wuthering Heights at number 8. Dear You enters the chart at number 9 at $236.3 million, but it has Obsession hot on its tail, and Backrooms is just out of the top 10, so we'll see how that shakes out next week. Blades of the Guardians, which is another film from China, out of the 2026 worldwide top 10, along with Scream 7. So those are all the box office numbers I have for you this week. Let's take a look now at the latest from the world of streaming. And we'll start with the latest numbers from Netflix. These cover the week of May 25th to the 31st. New ones will be out tomorrow. And the number 1 most watched program on a sort of not impressive week of Netflix ratings data was the Sacha Baron Cohen movie Ladies First at 18.84 million views. In 2nd place was the true crime documentary film The Crash at 14 million views. Then the animated film Swapped at 10.47 million views. The new Netflix series The Burrows comes in 4th place at 9.5 million views, followed by GOAT at number 5 at 9.42 million views. It's been a pretty consistent Sony licensed film as far as overall performance for Netflix. At number 6 is A Perfect Getaway, which brought in 6.74 million views. This is a 2009 film starring Mila Jovovich and Steve Zahn as honeymooners who are being stalked in the wilderness. And I suspect that this was given an algorithm boost because it is very similar to the number 7 film Apex, which is a Netflix original movie that's been doing well. It brought in 6.13 million views. The Netflix series Nemesis is at number 8, followed by another film, Cleaner, and I don't really have an explanation for this one. This is a 2007 Rennie Harlan film starring Samuel L. Jackson as a crime cleaner who gets mixed up in some bad business with Ed Harris. It brought in 5.26 million views. With viewership that low, though, in the top 10, who really knows what's going to sneak in there? Like I said, this is not really impressive viewing data for Netflix. And at number 10 is Remarkably Bright Creatures with just under 5 million views. These are the most watched Netflix programs so far this year. The Crash sneaks into the top 10 ahead of Peaky Blinders, The Immortal Man at 53.31 million views. The rest of the top 10 pretty much the same, except that Apex has now jumped over The Rip to become the 2nd most viewed Netflix movie of the year at 117.98 million views. The Rip is at 114.71 million. And at the end of this month, at the end of June, we should get the full half-year Netflix ratings report, which could shift some of this top 10 around because it won't just be the weeks that they were on the Netflix top 10 charts. But for now, this is the best we have based on the data that we've been given. Let's turn now to the latest numbers from Nielsen. Now, these are domestic numbers only, not global numbers like we just saw with Netflix, and they're delayed by about a month because Nielsen just likes to take their sweet time. These are the most watched streaming movies for the latest data we have, which is May 4th through the 10th. At number 1 is Swapped on Netflix. This was its second week on the streaming service, and it matched what we saw globally, which was a pretty good debut, followed by a big surge in viewership in week number 2. 14.2 million hours watched. Remarkably Bright Creatures debuts in second place at 11.6 million hours watched. Then we have Send Help, another 2026 movie that I just watched for the first time in the past week and enjoyed. It debuted on Hulu with 7.16 million hours watched. Tied in with the holiday, we have Mother's Day on Netflix at 4.9 million hours watched, followed by Apex at 4.76 million hours watched. The Devil Wears Prada stays in the top 10 at number 6, followed by Zootopia 2 at number 7. The Proposal hitting the top 10 at 3.23 million hours watched. Pretty Woman at number 9. I'm guessing maybe, again, that's algorithmically. Julia Roberts is in Mother's Day, so Pretty Woman may be suggested for people to watch at 2.916 million hours watched. And Striking Distance, that random Bruce Willis movie, hitting the top 10 at 2.88 million hours watched. These were the top 10 most watched streaming shows on May 4th through the 10th. At number 1 was La Brea at 23.36 million hours watched. The Boys sticking around at number 2 at 17.46 million hours watched. This is in the midst of its final season. Man on Fire on Netflix is at number 3 with 14 million hours watched, followed by Bluey and Grey's Anatomy. The Big Bang Theory is at number 6. Worst Ex Ever returns to the top 10 with its new set of episodes at 12.96 million hours watched, followed by SpongeBob SquarePants at number 8. The Rookie returning to the top 10 at number 9 with 10 million hours watched, and Family Guy rounding out the top 10. And when we look at the top shows as far as watch time per available episode, so you take the number of hours watched divided by the number of episodes you can watch, that's how you get this number. Lord of the Flies, which is an import from the BBC, is at number 1. It didn't have huge viewership, but it brought in 2.35 million hours of watch time per episode in its streaming debut here in the United States. Man on Fire at number 2 with 2 million hours per episode, followed by Worst Ex Ever at 1.62 million hours per episode. Then the series Funny AF with Kevin Hart, which brought in just over 1 million hours of watch time per episode. Miss Rachel rounds out the top 5, followed by La Brea at number 6. MIA at number 7 at 618,000 hours per episode. The newest episodes of Citadel on Amazon Prime Video dropped in that early May window. Remember Citadel, like one of their most expensive shows ever? Well, it was good enough for number 8 on a watch time per available episode basis at just over 500,000 hours per episode, so maybe that was worth it. The Boys is at number 9 at 459,000 hours of watch time per episode, and Running Point rounds out the top 10 at 380,000 hours per episode. And those are all the numbers I have for you this week. Before we go, I wanted to draw your attention to some things you might be interested in at home and in theaters this upcoming week. First of all, tomorrow on Tuesday, Michael will be available to watch at home via purchase and premium video on demand, even though it's still in the top 10. I've seen some criticism of this decision. Mortal Kombat 2 also available starting tomorrow for purchase and premium video on demand at home. On Thursday, we have a massive global event. The FIFA World Cup, which is being held here in North America, has its kickoff and will continue over the next several weeks. I hope we don't embarrass ourselves as a host country. That's all I have to say. Then on Friday, the big summer release, as I mentioned, Disclosure Day, directed by Steven Spielberg. I'm on the road today to see it. You can look for my review tomorrow morning when the review embargo is lifted. Also hitting many theaters this upcoming Friday is The Furious, which is a Hong Kong action film directed by fight choreographer Kenji Tanigaki about a father fighting to recover his kidnapped daughter. The cast includes Joe Taslim, and early reviews for the film have been stellar, so I might have to check that out. Also hitting theaters around the country this upcoming Friday is Stop That Train, starring RuPaul and several contestants from RuPaul's Drag Race. It is a campy disaster film about a passenger train called the Glamazonian Express that's headed into a superstorm. On Saturday, if you're a BTS fan, there is another live viewing of one of their concerts in Busan, so you can check that out on Saturday, evening or I guess afternoon, depends on your time zone. And also on Saturday, the annual re-release of Studio Ghibli films continues with Ponyo. So if you have not seen Ponyo on the big screen, you can see it on Saturday. And that's all I've got for you this week. This has been such a fun summer already when it comes to box office tracking, and I'm excited to keep going with an original film from Steven Spielberg to see how it opens this upcoming weekend. So stay tuned right here on the channel because I'll be back next week to talk about that. Also, as I mentioned, my review of Disclosure Day. I put out my first ever video game review earlier this weekend of the James Bond game 007 First Light, so you can check that out. I'm also working on a few special videos. I always got something in the pot that I'm cooking up. So if you're not subscribed, please hit that subscribe button. Hit the bell so you know when I upload a new video. But most of all, thank you for watching this video. Until next time, stay safe, and I'll see you then. Bye.